My parents gave my college fund to my brother the night before my applications were due. Then Uncle Morris's lawyer called. My name is Clara Whitfield. I'm 29 years old. For 16 years, I watched my parents pour every dollar, every conversation, and every square foot of hope in our house into my older brother, Daniel. I was the one who kept the grades, kept the peace, and kept the silence. And the first time anyone ever said the words "that was wrong" out loud, it wasn't my mother, it wasn't my father, and it certainly wasn't Daniel. It was a lawyer named Gerald Foss, sitting behind a mahogany desk in downtown Columbus, reading from a document my Uncle Morris had spent the last 2 years of his life making completely airtight on purpose. There were 6 chairs in the room. My mother told me to take the one by the door, the one closest to the exit. I noticed that before I even sat down. Before I continue the story, I'd like to ask you, my dear listeners, to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It truly inspires me to create even more captivating stories for you. But we need to go back, because that room, and that chair, and that lawyer did not begin with my uncle's death. They began 16 years earlier, in the kitchen of a house on Birchwood Lane, on a Tuesday evening in October, when I was 13 years old and my father came home carrying a brochure for a private baseball academy 3 states away. Daniel was 17. Daniel was always the reason for everything. The academy cost $14,000 for the spring semester. My father sat at the table and said it was an investment. My mother poured coffee and said Daniel had real potential. I was sitting at the same table, doing homework, and neither of them looked at me once while they decided. Later that night, I overheard them in the hallway. My mother said they would need to pull from the education account. My father said they'd rebuild it before Clara needs it. My name, spoken like a footnote. I was 13. I already knew what that meant. I just didn't know yet how completely they meant it. Let me tell you what kind of family we looked like from the outside because it matters. We were the presentable kind. My mother, Susan Whitfield, taught Sunday school and brought casseroles to sick neighbors. My father, Robert, coached youth soccer for 8 years and knew every kid on the block by name. We had a clean house, a nice yard, a dog named Henry who slept at the foot of Daniel's bed. From the outside, we were the family people pointed to when they said some kids just have it together. What they didn't see was the architecture underneath. Daniel was the sun. Everything orbited him. Not because he was cruel, he wasn't, not really, not on purpose, but because my parents had decided, sometime before I was old enough to argue, that his life was the one worth building. His dreams had square footage. Mine were something to be appreciated, managed, kept tidy in a corner where they wouldn't take up space. By the time I was 10, I had learned to read the household mood by the pitch of Daniel's voice. If he had a good practice, dinner was warm and easy. If he'd had a bad game, my mother moved around the kitchen like she was defusing something. My father would spend the evening rebuilding Daniel's confidence with the kind of patient attention I used to practice receiving in my head, the way you rehearse a conversation you know will never happen. I was a good student, quietly, insistently good, in the way that children become when they figure out that excellence is the one currency available to them. I made straight A's from the 5th grade forward. I read books nobody assigned. I entered essay contests and won 2 of them before anyone in my family asked what I'd written about. When I told my mother I'd placed first in the county writing competition, she said, "That's wonderful, honey," and then called Daniel in from the backyard to tell him she'd made his favorite pasta. There was a science fair project in 7th grade. I built a working model of a water filtration system out of materials from the hardware store. I spent 3 weeks on it, researching, testing, remaking it twice when the results weren't clean enough. I placed second in the district. My teacher, Mr. Hargrove, told me I should consider environmental science as a career, and those words sat in my chest like a small warm stone for months. I told my parents at dinner the night of the competition. My father said, "Second place, huh? What went wrong?" He didn't ask it cruelly. He asked it the way people ask when they're already thinking of the next thing. My mother said that Daniel had a doubleheader on Saturday and asked if I could iron his uniform before then. I ironed it. I also wrote down Mr. Hargrove's words in the back of my notebook and kept them for years. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it because it was the texture of everything. the way water shapes a rock. Constant, quiet, requiring no single dramatic event to leave a mark. The private academy was just the first time I saw it written in dollars. Daniel went. The education account, which my parents had opened when I was born, and which my grandmother had contributed to every Christmas, went with him. My father said they'd rebuild it before I needed it. He said that 3 more times over the next 4 years. Once when Daniel needed a new pitching coach. Once when they drove cross-country for a tournament that turned out to matter less than my father had predicted, and once more when Daniel's car needed a transmission, and it seemed only logical that family money was family money. When I was a junior in high school, I had a meeting with my guidance counselor, Mrs. Okafor, who had been watching me work for 3 years and had a habit of saying what she saw. She sat me down in October and told me I was exactly the kind of student elite universities were looking for. She said the word scholarship like she was setting it on the table between us as a gift. She gave me a list of schools, a timeline, a notebook with tabs. She said I had a real chance. I went home and told my parents. My father said that was great. My mother said she was proud of me. Daniel came in from the garage and asked what was for dinner, and the conversation turned in his direction the way it always did, naturally, the way a river finds its course. I started working on my applications in August of my senior year. Personal essays, supplemental questions, financial aid forms. I filled out the FAFSA and discovered for the first time that the education account I'd been told would be there for me had a current balance of 0. I asked my father about it in September. He said there had been some unexpected costs. He said it quietly, the way people speak when they know the floor beneath the words is thin. He said they'd help where they could. He said I was smart enough to make things work. That phrase, smart enough to make things work, would turn out to be the sentence my parents used every time they meant I could handle a smaller portion of everything. I filed for every scholarship I could find. I wrote 17 essays between October and January. I stayed up past midnight on school nights, sitting at the desk in my room with the door closed, writing about resilience and determination and future goals while downstairs my parents watched television and my brother slept. I applied to 11 schools. 2 nights before my applications were due, my father knocked on my bedroom door. He sat on the edge of my desk chair with his hands folded and told me that a very good opportunity had come up for Daniel. A semi-professional development league out of Arizona had offered him a spot on a training roster. There was a fee, a significant one. And they were going to need to use the money they'd been setting aside to help me with first-year costs. He said they believed in me. He said I was the capable one. He said they knew I'd find a way. I sat in my desk chair and looked at my father for a long moment. My 11 applications were open on my laptop. The cursor was blinking in one of the essay boxes. I said, okay. That was what I said. Okay. Because by the time you are 17 and have spent a decade learning that your needs are the ones the family can afford to defer, you do not cry or argue or demand. You say okay. You say okay the way you close a window in a room where you've been cold for years, not because the cold is gone, but because you have learned to carry it more efficiently. I submitted my applications that night. Alone. Without anyone asking how it went. I got into 4 schools. One offered me a partial scholarship. I took it. I worked 2 jobs through all 4 years of college. I took out loans I am still paying. I graduated with honors, moved to Columbus, got a job at an environmental consulting firm, and built a life that was entirely, structurally mine. The jobs were a coffee shop 6 in the morning until 10 and a library desk 3 evenings a week. I learned to do homework on my breaks, standing up, a textbook propped against the espresso machine or under the return books cart. I learned to eat dinner in 12 minutes. I learned to study for finals on 4 hours of sleep without feeling sorry for myself, because self-pity requires a certain amount of spare time I didn't have. My roommate freshman year, a girl from Cincinnati named Priya, once watched me get up at 5:30 on a Saturday and said, "How are you always like this?" I told her I'd been practicing since I was 8. She laughed. I hadn't been joking. My parents called once a month, roughly. The calls were brief and structured, the way calls are when neither party knows how to talk about what is real. My mother asked about my coursework. My father asked if I needed anything, and when I told him what I needed, help with a particularly difficult loan month, a textbook that cost $200, he would say, "Let us see what we can do." And what they could do was always nothing or close to it, because Daniel had a new trainer. Daniel was exploring other leagues. Daniel needed a reliable car for the commute to his second attempt at a development team in Georgia.
I did not ask again after the third time.
I figured out a different way. That was what smart enough to manage actually meant in practice, and I was getting very good at the practice of it. Daniel's Arizona league folded after one season. He came home at 26, moved into the basement room my parents renovated for him, and has been there since. Working at the sporting goods store he claims is temporary, playing recreational softball on weekends, existing in the same comfortable orbit my parents constructed for him 30 years ago. None of that is meant to make Daniel sound like a villain. He's not one. He's a man who was handed a pedestal early and never developed the muscles that come from climbing. That's a different kind of damage. My Uncle Morris was my father's older brother, and he was the one person in my family who watched everything I've just described and named it while it was happening. He was not a warm man in the conventional sense. He didn't give hugs or speak in the soft vocabulary of comfort. He was precise, methodical, the kind of person who communicated care through attention rather than affection. He noticed things.
He remembered them.
He was the only adult in my family who, at Thanksgiving when I was 15, asked me what I was reading, and then actually listened to the answer for 6 uninterrupted minutes while my father talked over him trying to redirect the table toward Daniel's batting average. Uncle Morris never married. He had a townhouse in Columbus, a financial planning practice he'd built over 30 years, and a habit of calling me on my birthday every year without fail to ask one question. "What are you building?" He never asked Daniel that. I noticed. I never mentioned it. He got sick 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, which moves the way it moves, which is to say quickly and without negotiation. He called me in November, 7 months after his diagnosis, and asked me to come see him.
I drove up on a Saturday.
We sat in his living room surrounded by the organized quiet of a man who has spent time understanding exactly what he has and where it goes. He asked about my job, my apartment, a course I was taking in environmental law. He listened the way he always listened, completely. I noticed during that visit that he had tagged several books on his shelves with small sticky notes. Color-coded, from what I could see, though he didn't explain the system. His desk had 3 neat folders on it, each labeled in his handwriting. The apartment felt like a man wrapping up a project he'd been working on for a long time. I understood what I was seeing. I didn't say anything about it because he hadn't invited me to, and Uncle Morris was the kind of person who opened the doors he meant to open. Near the end of the afternoon, he said, "I want you to know I saw what happened to you." I didn't ask him what he meant. "I knew," he said. "I didn't intervene the way I should have. Your father is my brother, and I told myself it wasn't my place. I want to tell you that I was wrong about that." I said something like it was fine. That's the reflex. The years of okay sitting in the throat. He said, "It wasn't. But I'm going to do what I can with what I have left." I didn't ask him what he meant by that, either. I assumed he meant emotionally. I assumed he was talking about the time we had left with him, which turned out to be 4 more months. He died in March, on a Thursday, in the early morning. His neighbor, a retired teacher named Patricia, who checked on him every day that last month, called me at 6:15. I drove to Columbus in a state that felt less like grief and more like the sudden awareness of an absence that had been coming for a long time and still arrived completely unprepared for. I helped Patricia call the necessary people. I sat in his apartment for a while after they left. I looked at his books, his desk, his 3 neat folders. I felt the specific loneliness of losing the one person in a family who is truly paying attention. My parents flew to Columbus for the service. Daniel did not attend, citing a scheduling conflict that, when I thought about it later, no one questioned out loud, though I noticed my mother's jaw tighten slightly when she mentioned it, which was as close as she came to accountability for him. My father shook hands with people from Uncle Morris's firm and said his brother had been a brilliant man. My mother brought flowers and cried genuinely in the pew, and I believed her grief was real, because people can be sorry for a death and still have missed everything that mattered about the person while they were living, asking me to attend a will reading on a specific date. The letter was addressed only to me. No mention of my parents. No mention of Daniel. I called my mother. She said she hadn't received one. There was a pause in the conversation. The kind of pause that arrives when a family's arithmetic is about to change and everyone who benefited from the old numbers feels it coming. She said, "Well, I'm sure they'll notify us separately." They didn't. The law firm was a single suite on the 14th floor of a building near the Scioto River. Dark wood, good carpet, the quiet of a place where documents are the main event. The receptionist offered me water and showed me to a conference room with one chair pulled out from the table. Gerald Foss introduced himself, shook my hand, asked if I expected anyone else to join me. I told him I didn't know. I told him my mother had mentioned she might come. He checked his files and said, "The reading today is for Clara and Whitfield. There are no additional parties listed." I sat down. My mother arrived 7 minutes later. I heard her voice at the reception desk, pleasant and assuming in equal measure. The voice she used when she expected access and didn't anticipate a problem. The voice that had never had to develop a different register. The receptionist said something I couldn't hear. My mother's voice changed pitch. Then the conference room door opened and she came in, smiling the kind of smile that is mostly structure and very little warmth, and she said, "I thought I might sit in. Morris was my brother-in-law for 30 years. Gerald Foss looked at her the way people look at a door that has opened in the wrong direction. Measured. Unhurried. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "the reading today is for your daughter. The document includes specific instructions regarding attendance. I'm not able to include additional parties." My mother blinked. "That seems unusual." "Your brother-in-law was a thorough planner," Foss said. "He anticipated this moment specifically." There it was. My mother looked at me. I looked at my hands. She said, "Clara, Shirley." I said, "Mom." That was all. Just her title. But she heard the rest of it in my voice, because daughters who have spent 16 years making themselves smaller than they are develop a very precise control over the weight of a single word. She heard something in that mom that told her this room was not available for management today. She left. I heard her heels on the carpet. The door closed. Foss sat down, opened his folder, and before he read a single word, said, "Your uncle wanted me to tell you something before we begin." He said, and I'm quoting directly, "Tell Clara she was right to say okay all those years, and that she doesn't have to anymore." I had to press my palms flat against the table to hold myself level. Because I had never told Uncle Morris the story of my father at my desk, the cursor blinking, my 11 applications open, my father saying the money was going to Daniel. I had never told anyone that story. I had certainly never told him that the word I said was okay. He had known anyway. That's what kind of attention he paid. Foss gave me a moment. Then he opened the will. Morris Elliott Whitfield had no children. His estate, built over a career of careful, patient work, included his Columbus townhouse, 3 investment accounts, a bond portfolio, a cash reserve at Huntington Bank, and a collection of first edition books he had been buying since his 20s. The townhouse had been appraised at $412,000. The investment accounts at just under $800,000 combined. Everything went to me. Every single line of that document had my name on it. My full name, Clara and Whitfield, typed with the specificity of a man who knew that precision is kindness when the alternative is ambiguity that other people can exploit. Foss read through it cleanly, page by page, the language of final choices in the voice of a man who had heard a lot of them and knew better than to editorialize. But at the end, before he closed the folder, he said, "There is a letter." It was in a cream envelope. My name in my uncle's handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed every birthday card for 29 years without missing one. Foss opened it himself, broke the seal with a letter opener, unfolded 2 pages, and began to read. "Clara, if you are hearing this, then I have done what I intended to do, and Gerald has kept my instructions exactly as I gave them, which means your mother is in the hallway." That part one knew would happen. Some people will always arrange themselves toward the resources before they've confirmed what the room holds. I want you to know that I found that predictable, not cruel. It is worth the distinction. I want to explain what I'm doing and why, because you have spent your whole life in a family that acted like explanations were something you had to earn through service. You don't owe service for explanations. You don't owe anything for explanations. I watched your parents raise 2 children. I watched them decide, early and without much discussion, that Daniel's life was the investment and yours was the overhead. I don't believe they are bad people. I believe they made a choice that became a habit, that became an architecture they stopped being able to see. That happens in families. The person it happens to, though, sees it with remarkable clarity by the time they're 10 years old and carries the weight of that clarity alone for the rest of the time they live in that house. I watched you carry it. I watched you make straight A's and win essay contests and stay up late writing applications while your brother slept. I watched your parents pull your education account once and then again and then once more and tell themselves you were strong enough to manage. I watched you say okay in the way people say okay when they've learned that anything louder will cost them something they can't afford to lose. I should have intervened. I've said this to you in person, and I will say it again here because I want it on record, in language that cannot be softened or reinterpreted at a family dinner. I was wrong to stay quiet. Being someone's brother does not make you neutral about what they're doing to their daughter. Neutrality in that situation is a choice, and I made it for too many years before I understood what I was choosing. I cannot give you the years. I cannot give you the college experience you would have had without loans, or the April of your senior year when your father sat at your desk and took the money, or the 17 essays you wrote alone at midnight, or the 1,000 small moments when you were the one standing while everyone else sat down. Those are not mine to give back. What I can give you is what I built, and the right to build your own life with a foundation that isn't borrowed or apologized for or earned through someone else's comfort. The townhouse is yours. Do with it what you want. Sell it if a different city suits you. Keep it if you want a place in Columbus that belongs to you without any of the history of Birchwood Lane. The accounts are yours. Not to ask for. Not to justify. Not to explain to anyone in this family or adjacent to it. One more thing. If your mother or your father or your brother approaches you about private redistribution, and at least one of them will, I want you to know I anticipated that too. Gerald will explain the clause. It is not punitive. It is simply a boundary, written in the language that families like yours understand best, which is financial consequence. You are the capable one. I know that's what they told you. I want to tell you what I meant by it, which is that you were capable of surviving their choices. That is not a compliment. That is a description of damage that looked like strength from a distance. You are also the one with excellent taste in books, better arguments than anyone else in the family by a wide margin, and more discipline in your left hand than Daniel has in his entire history of being believed in. I am proud of you. I have been proud of you for 20 years. I should have said it louder while I could. Consider this the volume I owed you. With love and with apology in equal measure, Morris. Foss folded the letter. I did not press my lips together. I did not look at my hands. I cried, quietly, for about 2 minutes, in the conference room of a law firm on the 14th floor of a building near the Scioto River, and Gerald Foss sat across from me and did not rush me and did not offer platitudes, and that was exactly the right thing to do. When I was composed, he explained the clause. Any family member who contested the will or pressured me toward voluntary redistribution outside of his counsel would trigger a provision redirecting their nominal bequest. Uncle Morris had left my parents a small sum in acknowledgement of their relationship to a Columbus nonprofit that provides college counseling to first-generation students. He had chosen it specifically. He had made a donation to them the year before he died. He wanted the connection to be legible to anyone who knew what to look for. My father received a cashier's check for $3,000 and a note in my uncle's handwriting. Robert, you are my brother, and I love you. I also watched you take Clara's future 4 separate times and call it practicality.
This is what I can do about that.
The rest is yours to work out with her if she allows it, on her terms only. Morris. My mother received a similar amount and a note that said simply, Susan, you are a good woman who made a sustained and costly choice. I hope you find the language for it eventually. Daniel received nothing. No check, no note, no acknowledgement. Just the absence of his name in a document that contained everyone else's. Uncle Morris had apparently decided that the most precise thing to say to a man who had spent 30 years being handed things was to hand him nothing and let him sit with the shape of that. I drove home that evening in a state I don't have a clean word for.
Not euphoria.
Not triumph. Something quieter and more structural. The feeling of a floor appearing under your feet in a room where you'd been standing on air for a very long time. My mother called the next morning. She was careful. She asked how the reading had gone. I told her it had gone as Uncle Morris intended. She said she was sure he had meant well. I told her I agreed with her. She asked if we could have lunch, just us, to talk through things.
I said, yes.
On one condition. She said, "What's that?" I said, "No one tells me I'm the capable one as a reason why less is fair." There was a pause. The kind of pause that means a person is running through their usual vocabulary and finding it unavailable. She said, "Okay." I noticed she said it. I noticed what it cost her. We had lunch 2 weeks later. It was careful and incomplete and real in the way first conversations after long damage are real, more acknowledgement than understanding, more arrival than resolution. My mother said she knew things had been unequal. She said it in the passive voice, the way people describe whether they weren't responsible for. But she said it. She looked at the table when she said it. That was something. My father tried a different approach. He called me on a Wednesday evening, and I could hear from his voice that he had prepared what he was going to say. He told me that Morris had been a complicated man. He told me that family dynamics were hard to understand from the outside, even for family members. He said he hoped I wouldn't make decisions based on one side of a story. I said, "Dad, you sat at my desk the night before my applications were due and told me the money was going to Daniel." He said, "We were trying to." I said, "I know. I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling to tell you I understand exactly what happened, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. If you want a relationship with me, it starts from that understanding, not from a revision of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I had not heard him say in 29 years of being his daughter. He said, "You're right."
Not a speech.
Not a restructured narrative. Just those 2 words in the tired voice of a man who has run out of the energy required to keep the previous version of the story standing. I said, "Thank you. We're building something from that, my father and I. It's slow. It's uneven in the way of things that grew crooked for a long time and are trying to correct. I don't know what it becomes. I know it's honest in a way nothing between us was before. Daniel and I have spoken twice since the will reading. The first time was awkward, both of us using formal language in the way of people who have been close proximity strangers their whole lives and are now acknowledging it. He said it seemed like Morris had really respected me. I told him that was true. He didn't say anything else about the will. I didn't ask him to. The second conversation was shorter. He said he thought I deserved good things. I said thank you. He sounded like he meant it, and I chose to take that at face value because sometimes taking something at face value is the only dignified way forward. I have not sold the townhouse. I live in it. I repainted the living room in a color I chose from a book of samples I spent 3 Saturdays going through, which is the most time I have ever spent choosing something for myself, without apology. I moved my books into the front room where the light is good. I bought a desk for the second bedroom, a real one, a substantial one, with a surface wide enough that I never feel like I'm working in a corner. I kept Uncle Morris's collection of first editions in the built-in shelves along the south wall. I added my own books alongside them. The spines are 2 different generations of the same conversation. I like it that way. I enrolled in evening classes for environmental law, not because I have to, because I want to. That distinction, wanting to versus having to, is one I am still learning to feel clearly, the way you learn to feel the difference between carrying weight and choosing to hold something. Some mornings I still move through the apartment in the old mode, efficient, anticipatory, arranging everything around someone else's comfort before I've checked what I need. That's the training. It doesn't evaporate. But now, when I catch myself doing it, I stop. I make coffee first. I sit in the chair by the window that has the best morning light. I read a chapter of something good before I do anything that resembles service. That's what the inheritance became for me, in the end. Not accounts, not property. Not even justice, Because justice implies that someone sat down and decided to correct the ledger, and what actually happened is that one man saw clearly and acted on what he saw before time ran out. It became permission. The durable, written, legally formalized kind. Permission to stop being the capable one as a reason for less. Permission to say what I see. Permission to take the chair by the window and sit in it like I belong there, which I do. Which I always did. If you had been in that conference room, what would you have done when the door closed, and it was just you and the lawyer and your uncle's words? And when your family called afterward, wanting to talk, wanting to revise, wanting to find the version of the story where they come out even, would you have sat across from them? Would you have said what was true? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reached you somewhere it was supposed to, please like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.